And looks like we're live. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the premium live chat for January 25th, 2023. So we just went through our our winter storm for today. Kind of a winter storm, mostly for the interior. Waiting to see the official snowfall totals, but certainly looks like everything was on the low end of the expected forecast. I don't see any indication of any type of snowfall totals around 6 or 8 inches, but certainly a lot of 1 to 3, 1 to 4 inch type snowfall from the forecast. And here again is the forecast I had in place. Zones 5, 4, and I'd definitely say 5, 4 worked out well. Wasn't expecting anything. Zone 3, hit and miss. Zone 2, hit and miss. Zone 1, I'm not sure yet. There's some mixed reports north of Scranton of snowfall totals around 4 or 5 inches, so we'll see how that works out once I get the actual observations. But this, again, was another scenario where the short waves involved in this system just was not working out correctly for a significant snowfall. And we always knew ahead of time that this would be a scenario where everything would be on the front end with the warm front, and then everything changes over to rain. So what I decided to do today is go back and take a look at the winter forecast and discuss what went wrong, okay, in terms of what I thought was the possibility of what could go wrong in this forecast. And I'd zone in on part 4, although part 5, Godzilla attacking, would be equally as reasonable considering the way that this forecast has gone, which is a flaming dumpster, okay, at this point. Because one of the concerns I had, and again, with the concern of my confidence being very low in this forecast, was that the long wave factors, the stratospheric polar vortex becoming disrupted, the evolution of La Nina gradually weakening, all that was coming into play. But then the way that the short waves interacted just wasn't working out. So the fourth reason why I was concerned about the forecast certainly came into play. And then another part of that would be part 2, or reason 2 why I was concerned would be that the polar vortex, after being disrupted, would strengthen to the point that it produced almost a El Nino-like jet streak that produced a very wet period of weather for the West Coast. Both of those things happened, and I was commenting to one of the premium subscribers in the chat room today on Discord, was that it's almost like as if every aspect, aside from Godzilla showing up, of the forecast possibly going wrong appeared to have shown up. The EP flux worked out pretty well for the most part, but it did create chaos, and which that I thought that we'd see constant disruption, and we haven't really seen that. We've seen a break for a couple of weeks. Now we're going back to that. We saw the polar vortex strengthen. We saw La Nina. It's now more east-based now. It's not strong. It's a weak La Nina, but still went to east-based, and it caused displacement of the trough. Instead, you're getting this large ridge over much of Alaska into the Aleutians, which displaced the trough over the eastern United States, more towards the central United States. And so as a result, you get more of an influence from the southeast ridge. So there's that factor. And of course, finally, the interaction of shortwave. So now that we've already gone through that, the question is, where do we go from here? And whether or not we'll be able to see any snowfall accumulation on the coastal plain. And when I look at the observations and look at what is evolving here in the stratosphere, and what is evolving in the in the tropics with our tropical forcing. We're seeing La Nina gradually weaken. We're seeing that in the temperature anomalies here. And we're seeing the evolution with the polar vortex here being stretched and weakened. And I'm noticing a few factors here that say to me, yes, we'll see colder waves, but we're not going to see the type of pattern where we get a strong negative NAO or anything of that nature. And the reason why, the one warning sign I see out of this is what I'm seeing with the EP flux here. Now, through the first 7 days, the evolution of the vectors from the mid-latitudes in the troposphere to the higher latitudes in the stratosphere work out great. This would suggest stretching. But once you get to days 8, 9, 10, we start to lose that evolution. And beyond day 10, we start to see the exact opposite. So what does this mean when we take a look at this and we see these vectors and we're seeing that it's kind of flipping back and forth? It means that, yes, there'll be disruption, yes, there'll be warming in the stratosphere, but it won't be strong enough to create a major stratospheric warming event or a complete destruction of the polar vortex, based on the data that we're seeing now. It's stretching, strengthening, stretching, strengthening. And that is what we're seeing in the guidance here. I'm going to use the European guidance to illustrate this. Here's our temperature at 10 millibars. Again, you can clearly see the stratosphere is warming, but the winds don't reverse. We see some weakening, but it never reverses, and that's an important observation. That means that that any support influencing the 500 millibar pattern would not lead to strong enough blocking to set up your traditional negative NAO pattern and slowing down of the 500 millibar pattern. What this does support, and we take a look at 50 millibars here with this stretching, is the prospect of an Arctic air mass pressing down into the eastern United States and central United States. And so with that, let me see, pull up here. This is the type of illustration that you get from the European ensembles with this Arctic air pressing into the eastern United States into a tropical air mass. And you can see that in waves, but it's not sustained. It comes in waves, then starts to back off. So can this produce a winter storm? Well, we are seeing some indications of that potential in some of the ensemble guidance. Now, you never take this stuff verbatim. As I warned you when you see winter storms 10, 15 days out, or even 7 days out. But you can see the setup here where you have a stationary front, and to the north is significantly colder air, and you get these waves of low pressure marching along it. And yeah, there is that potential during the first part of February that we could see some accumulating snowfall, maybe a winter storm. But what stands out to me in that scenario, in the guidance, let's say out 10 days, is I have no negative NAO out here. This is pretty much a positive NAO pattern. And that's going all the way through the 15-day period. So that's about pretty close to February 10th. So what this tells me is that you get a clash of air masses over the eastern United States, and you have the ability for Arctic air and polar air to slam into the southeast ridge and into this warmer air mass. And you get the potential for waves of low pressure to develop in this pattern to track along these cold fronts. But there's nothing to slow down the low pressure systems. There's nothing that will, unless the track is perfect, to keep cold air on the coastal plain or even over the interior. And it opens up the potential for low pressure systems to track into New England. So I know you probably came on here to hear me say hey, everything's going to be great, stratospheric warming, winter storm, cold air everywhere. But then I'd be lying to you. And I don't think you come here to be lied to or to be hyped to. Right? This is what I'm saying. I would love to say that, hey, the winter forecast is looking great and winter storms are on the way and nothing to worry about. But that just isn't what I'm seeing right now. What I'm seeing right now is an evolution of this pattern where, yes, there's potential, but it's all thread the needle type situation. Okay? It's all a situation where the low pressure systems have to interact just right. These short waves in this pattern have to interact just right. Now, the type of cold air that we're working with, we saw it over Siberia. That's heading this way. And it's impressive. I mean, this cold air over Canada is nothing to sneeze at, okay? This is some very impressive cold air, and it will be pressing south. It's just not sustained, and I cannot guarantee that this this setup won't just be a wave of low pressure with periods of rain, and then Arctic air comes in with a flash freeze or just temperatures crashing, and then it's cold and dry. And then it moderates again, and then another wave of low pressure approaches. I could easily see that happening, or low pressure systems developing along the East Coast just right to produce periods of snow. All of it depends on these individual short waves. Let's say out to 5 days. Let's go here. Individual short waves in here and here interacting in just the right way. This is not in any way, shape, or form a pattern that would support Miller A or Miller B storms. This is a type of pattern where you get a stationary front hanging somewhere around Oklahoma through the Tennessee River Valley and somewhere around the Mid-Atlantic, and waves of low pressure marching along. And if the interaction happens too early, like this current storm, then they cut up towards the eastern Great Lakes, and you get what we have today. Or if they interact just right, they cut towards the Delmarva Peninsula. The cold air comes in, and you get a wintry mix on the coastal plain, maybe some heavier snow over the interior. But what I'm trying to say to you is that I don't see any type of pattern through at least mid-February that would suggest definite major winter storm potential. I see a lot of maybes. I see a lot of so-so type patterns, but nothing that will lock in. And then after that, what typically happens after you get this type of stretching, and let's go to do the GFS ensembles real fast and pull up the 12Z. If it loads, there it is. Okay, typically what happens after the stretching pattern, which I think continues until about the 15th or so, is that the polar vortex starts to consolidate again and then strengthens. And in that scenario, basically you start to cut off your Arctic air. So that's why I've been saying for the past couple of days, I like the potential for snowfall until about the 20th of February. And then after that, it really gets curtailed. And I think after that, we start to see Pacific air masses marching across the country again. And yeah, California could get a little bit wet again. March, because I know I'm going to get this question, is there a chance for a March winter storm? I never rule it out, but boy, oh boy, it's not going to look very favorable right now. It would have to be something that would be out of the normal of what we typically see in this type of evolution, where the polar vortex will start to strengthen again. So that's where we are with the long-range pattern. It's probably not what you want to hear, but it's what you had to hear. It's something that is just the honest truth based on what I'm seeing tonight on the data. In the meantime, waves of rainfall continue to march into the region. We're seeing some strong winds on the coastal plain, as expected, gusts. Now, just so you know, when you're reading this chart, you see this red part right here? That stands for wind gusts. And basically what we're seeing here are wind gusts around 25, at times 30 miles per hour on the coastal plain. That is all driven by our strong jet streak here that is at 850 millibars, driving warm air in. And as you can see at the surface, the only place left with freezing temperatures is right around the Catskills. Everyone else is above freezing. Northeastern Pennsylvania is in the 40s. Connecticut is in the 40s, pushing into the mid-30s over northern Connecticut, and just waves of rainfall marching up the coast with this storm. So expect through this evening periods of heavier rainfall, and then gradually improving as we head towards tomorrow. Tomorrow featuring much better weather conditions. Over the next 10 days beyond this point, I really don't see any type of major winter storm or anything of that nature. Again, we'll keep an eye on next week and to see where this stationary front sets up, because depending on the track of this low pressure system, right now we're seeing a lot of focus towards portions of central New York and northeastern Pennsylvania, which of course would be a rain event. But I'm also seeing a lot of guidance suggesting more of a track down towards the Delmarva Peninsula. And remember, around that same time period, you have that Arctic air mass right on the doorstep here. So if this ends up a little bit further south, then you're ending up with a much colder forecast. And don't be surprised if you see great swings in the forecast during this time period for next week, depending on where that cold front actually is setting up and where those waves of low pressure develop. And all of that really comes down to the interaction between this short wave and this short wave. So we'll keep an eye on that. But again, nothing stands out to me as any type of guarantee or high confidence event in terms of any type of snow development or wintry precipitation. So those are basically my thoughts for this evening. So I figure now I'll take your questions and we'll go from there. And again, I'm just being candid, and hopefully everyone can respect that or not. So let's dive into the questions. Okay, look at Earth New School. Okay, we'll look at Earth New School. And we want to go to 10 millibars. Okay, let's zoom out. Over central and eastern Russia, some of the biggest warm pockets is above freezing. Is there any chance that the woman could exceed forecasts and lead to greater stretching or disruption? I can't rule it out, but right now I have the European ensembles, the GFS and the GFS ensembles, all pretty much in agreement on the general warming idea. Now, even if we see more enhanced warming, so far I have literally no data whatsoever that would cause a reversal in the winds. And therein lies the problem. If we don't have that reversal in the winds, then you don't have anything to force strong high latitude blocking and negative NAO pattern. So what you would need is such a huge amount of error in the guidance right now that 10 days out, it was completely wrong in terms of the 500 millibar pattern overall. Have I seen that before? Yes, once or twice. But thus far, normally when that happens, I see some sort of observations that would help to drive that change. And right now, I'm not seeing that. Also, is there anything which would change the forecast orientation of the polar vortex and blocking regime that would alter the NAO state to something more favorable for snow to the coast? If this portion of the polar vortex shifted towards, let's say, Greenland and then dropped down towards Quebec, that could be a factor that would be different than what's being forecasted. Right now, I'm not seeing any type of indication of that. And I remember last week people were asking about wave 1 or wave 2. This is an example of wave 1. Wave 2 would be if this feature and I had another feature here that was equally as strong to split the polar vortex. That's a wave 2 structure. This is a wave 1 structure, which supports stretching, but no indication of any type of split or, again, any type of reversal. Regarding snow here in Lehigh Valley, I think 1.5 to 2 inches. Yeah, that looked like it verified pretty nicely. I'm not sure about Connecticut. I don't know whether that verified well or not. It seems that we are relying on the thread the needle scenarios for snow to the coast. Likelihood of a good snowstorm is rather low at this point. I would agree with that analysis overall. Yeah, I mean, that's basically what I'm saying. We got to plow and salt. Well, congratulations, Snowballs. That is awesome. I'm glad you guys were able to get out there. I know that it's hard for a lot of you snowplow guys out there. Certainly not the season I expected. Again, it felt like I jinxed myself in terms of listing what could go wrong, and then almost literally every single one of them happened. So, I know the snowplow guys out there are hurting. I wish I could do something about it, but the best thing I could do is just tell you the truth on how to prepare for that as a result. It sounds like we'll get very cold, dry air followed by warm, wet, then cold, dry, then warm, wet. Right now, that has been the theme for most of this winter, has it not? Boy, are you just a big bundle of good news. Yeah, I know. I mean, but like I said, I think the best thing I could do is be honest with you. I know there's a lot of people out there that might be... well, look, there's some people that just go warm, warm, warm all the time. And others that, scream big, huge storms every week and try to compare it to whatever historic storm happens to be in place for that month or that week. But that just isn't my style. If I see an active winter pattern, I'll say, look, there's an active winter pattern. If I see that it's not working out, I have to tell you, it's not working out. And one of the things I want to study as we go into the spring and look back at this season is I want to see what caused the mistiming between these short waves. Was it the way that the ridges developed out in the Pacific in December? Was it maybe a factor of the QBO? I don't know. But it's something I'm going to be studying as we move forward over the next several weeks. Because the best... I had some people say to me a while ago, and this was actual meteorologists, saying, we're not going to do long-range forecasting anymore because of global warming and it's too difficult. And I found that interesting because if you're afraid to fail, you're afraid to learn. This science is not for those that need to be right all the time. I would love to be right all the time, but then I'd probably be locked up in a government facility because I'd be a freak of nature. You have to be willing to fail, but learn from it. So this is something I'm definitely going to be learning from as we move forward and to study to try to continue to improve, and see what could go. What the best thing I could have done with this forecast was at the very start of the winter forecast saying low confidence and this is what can go wrong. So then at the very least you can prepare for it. But this is something that we're just going to have to study and learn and figure out. We don't need a negative NAO to get snowstorms. We haven't had a blocking negative NAO since 2013-14 awesome winter. That is true. You don't need it, but it's a hell of a lot harder to get a winter storm without it. I think we all agree with that. You have to have everything come together just right, and to get that cold air in place just right. Even then, it can be questionable. Any flooding concerns for the rain tonight? Also, any power outages concerned with the winds? I don't think the winds will be strong enough to cause power outages, but then again, this is New Jersey, and I've seen us lose power when it's sunny out and a bit of a breeze and not a car accident. So I can't 100% rule it out, but I haven't heard any type of massive outages yet. As far as the rainfall, there's definitely a high potential for urban flooding with this heavier rainfall, but notice the trend is starting to push to the northeast and off the coast, especially around New Jersey. So I think that we're seeing the worst of it now, and there is some urban flooding, but nothing. I don't expect any type of river flooding or anything of that nature. Ensemble trends on an early February storm are not our friend. Yeah, that is definitely true. Again, I noticed some people even a couple of days ago were using the 18Z GFS to get hyped about a winter storm, and I'm like, why? Why are you doing that? That's just setting yourself up for disappointment. Like I said, the potential is there. It just hasn't worked out all winter, and I don't see anything that would set up that potential now. Let's see here. Any early thoughts on summer? If winter produces a little snow to the coast, can we at least get a cooler summer out of it? I do know this. We're no longer going to be dealing with La Nina. Thank God. Because after 3 years of La Nina, I am done with this nonsense. We're looking at probably a neutral and snow, maybe an El Nino developing in the summer, during the summer, and there's a lot of data suggesting by next fall. Usually in that evolution, your polar jet streams are a little bit further south. At the very least, there's a better potential for severe thunderstorms. So that could be something that we're going to be talking about. Usually you don't see the massive heat waves in that type of transition. But I agree with Rob Allen here. I can't believe La Nina hasn't completely collapsed. It certainly is weakened, but still not anything that I was thinking it would be more drastic than what we've seen. Are there any influences in the Pacific that could cause the Western Ridge to either help the shortwave timing or hurt it? My recollection is that the big storms without Atlantic blocking have been due to perfectly placed Western Ridge. Yes, it does. You need a ridge axis around Montana. Now, what I would look for, let me see if I can find the exact, let's see, I think, here we are. Okay, here's your date line right about here, right? What you'd want to see is for convection to start firing up right around here. You see a little burst right there. You want it more sustained, okay? If you get that convection right around here, usually about 7 to 10 days later, you have support for an East Coast storm, and usually a ridge axis right around here, and your East Coast storm right about here. And the reason why is because that ridge axis right here sets up a trough axis right here, right around Alabama, and sometimes right around the Alabama-Mississippi border. And so when it goes into a negative tilt right around South Carolina, that sets up holding cold air in place on the coast, and your storm tracking towards the benchmark. So that's when you start to see that support. Any surprises I could keep La Nina going or revive it? It would be historic and, quite frankly, shocking to see La Nina return. And thus far, there's no indication of that in the subsurface. And it's something that we've never seen before. There's never been a 4-peat La Nina. God, I hope I didn't jinx myself. But we've never seen anything like that before, and there's no indication of that happening. Can we at least get a 3 to 6 inch snowstorm before the winter is over for the coast? I can't rule it out. I'm not going to say no, but it's awfully difficult for me to say 100% yes. So I hope you understand what I mean by that. Let's check out the YouTube, and I'm sure a lot of people probably not happy with what I said, but at least they know I'm honest. I'm not going to tell you, hey, everything is perfect and great. Winter is very frustrating. I'm not missing the snow. let's see here. Okay, the winds for the most part with the storm tonight and driven by our jet streak here generally are going to be in the 30 to 40 mile per hour wind gust range. I'm not expecting anything more than that. And the good news is that the jet streak is shifting pretty quickly to the northeast. This storm is moving quickly here. You can see that on the water vapor really nicely. The short wave involved with this low pressure system, is rapidly lifting up towards the St. Lawrence River Valley, and then it's going to be jumping towards the Gulf of Maine. And the reason why it's doing that is because of this short wave right here. This little block here is just strong enough to force this storm to jump towards the Gulf of Maine. And because of that, it's going to shift your strongest lifting over the coastal waters. And so that's going to start to reduce our wind. So the strongest winds are going to continue on until about 10 p.m. or so. And then you're going to start to see it slacken off as the strongest support for it will start to lift off to the northeast. Is it time to put my plow truck away? I would say this. I always say to anybody who's removing snow, doing that in the business, is that if you could put it on without any lag time issues, then fine. But always be prepared for a surprise, in the late winter. So I can't 100% rule it out. What are your thoughts on the MJO in February, and will that enhance any chances for more cold? The MJO is under the influence of La Nina, and it's going to be until La Nina completely collapses. But in the forecast here, this would in theory support at the very least, a colder pattern. This part right here is neutral, so it literally has no impact whatsoever. You have this cold signal here towards the middle to end of February, and you have this cold signal right now that would support cold air coming in. But as you can see, the dominant influence is still La Nina, and the MJO will gain more and more influence as we head towards the spring rather than the end of this winter. But it's not inhibiting the potential for a cold pattern. I'll put it that way. Evening Steve, let's see here. Any good news from Central New Jersey snow contractors? Well, not really, no. What are the chances that we get a snowstorm riding up the coast in February? Oh, Dylan, we ask the question every week. 30%. Not good. Not good. That's what I'm trying to share with you guys, and being completely honest with you. Let's see here. So far, okay, good. All right. So, Steve, just curious, is there any relation to the negative AMO enhancing Nino and Ninas? No. Those are two separate factors. A negative AMO, and what they're talking about here is the Atlantic. Okay. The way that the AMO and ENSO interact is more on how they play with each other with the 500 millibar pattern, but neither one drives the other. El Ninos, La Ninas, and the state of the AMO are driven by currents in the ocean and how the thermal gradients drive pressure gradients, which drive winds, which feed back on itself. Neither one drives or influences the other, but they interact with each other and develop different type of 500 millibar patterns as a result. But neither one forces the other or has any influence on the other. But that's a great question. But definitely some great questions tonight, guys. And overall, look, I know that you guys were hoping that I'd come on and say everything's fine and everything looks good. But I don't think that's what you expect from me in terms of forecasting, just being dead honest with you. I want to say, hey, look, polar vortex is going to stretch, pattern's going to evolve. But when I look at data like this, not that, this, with the EPS 46 days, and I look at the NAO forecast, it's just positive all the way through February into March. I mean, what do I do with that data and then try to come on and tell you guys that, hey, look, we got high threat of snow chances all the way through February. We have definitely a high threat for cold patterns, for cold air masses to come in. But when I see a positive Arctic oscillation almost all the way through February and North Atlantic oscillation, I can't come on here and tell you, hey, look, there's going to be snowstorms that we're going to have to keep an eye on. The EPO would suggest that we definitely have that threat for Arctic air masses to build in. But again, I'm seeing this signal once we get past mid-February of just a continuous positive EPO pattern, positive Arctic oscillation pattern, positive North Atlantic oscillation pattern. And the PNA remains nearly negative all the way into March. These are not good signals if you're looking for a snowstorm, ladies and gentlemen. And last week, it was not as dire as what I'm seeing now for a lot of the snow lovers out there. So, again, I just want to be honest with you. In terms of, business, you know what I mean? I would love nothing more to say snow everywhere. I mean, look, business is better with that. More subscriptions, more eyeballs on the website, more traffic, more revenue from advertisement. But I think it would hurt even more if I lied to you and say everything's fine. Going to get cold all through February. Winter storms on parade in February. This right here that I'm looking at, you can't say that with a straight face. You can't say that when you have this signal showing up. So, again, in the shorter range, same thing. It is what it is. I hope that at the very least that you guys respect me in the fact that I am telling you what's going on straight and not providing any type of misleading data. So what does that mean going forward? I mean, I know that a lot of people are interested in what's going on for spring. I mentioned that before. I do like the idea, if we do see this transition, let me pull this up. Where is it? Here we are. I'm going to scroll down to the forecast here. Okay, so the forecast going forward with La Nina based on the CFS data is for a gradual El Nino to develop as we move on through the spring, but become more established. Again, we want to get above 0.5 in the summer and fall. So during the spring, we see more of a neutral signal, possibly transition to a warm neutral. That typically leads to a polar jet stream that is further south, not necessarily stronger, but definitely further south, increasing the potential for stronger cold fronts and typically preventing the building of a Bermuda high. Typically also this leads to more vertical wind shear and more active subtropical jet stream. So I do like the idea of the spring being very active for severe weather and whatnot. In the summer usually does not feature much in the way of major heat waves. Can't rule it out completely, but certainly not anything that would support a large ridge over the eastern United States. Unless you get a major severe weather event outbreaking in the plains, and then you get that ridge build up out ahead of it. But if this neutral state takes hold, that typically does not happen as much. And then as we head towards the end of summer, towards fall, looks like there's more support for like a marginal weak El Nino state. And the forecast here would suggest a El Nino state developing around the August, September, October time period. But this would be, at the very start, the very least, an east-based El Nino, which, all right, not exactly the best lead-into for the following fall, okay, if you are a snow lover. But we got a long way to go before we can dive into that data and trust anything that far out. Earlier you mentioned that with a weak El Nino, there may be a chance for the polar jet stream to sink south. Wouldn't the subtropical jet stream be more active and displace the polar jet stream? Great question, Rob. Okay, so here's typically what happens in this pattern. And I'll go pull this up. Let me pull up 500 millibars. Okay. So typically what happens, and we'll start off with the spring and summer, is that the polar jet stream is able to drop a little bit further south. But you're right, the subtropical jet stream is also more active. And so what happens is that they tend to interact more. As you head towards the cold seasons, you tend to have a higher potential for the polar and subtropical jet streams to interact. Remember, going into the winter, the one reason why I felt that there's a higher potential for interaction was because this season was going to act the least La Nina-like. And in some cases that was true. Like that major rainfall event in California is far more typical in an El Nino year than a La Nina year. And the reason why I said that is because usually the subtropical jet stream in La Nina is very weak. This year it's been moderate to strong. During El Ninos, you lose the support of the southeast ridge. So that gets knocked out. And what you have here is a better potential, and this is a great example almost of a El Nino pattern, where you have the polar jet stream and the subtropical jet stream interacting to create major storms. Now, if you get a weak El Nino and you have high latitude blocking, well, that typically leads to some of our more active, more impressive winters. If you have a weak La Nina with strong blocking, that can also lead to impressive winter weather seasons. But those winter weather seasons usually feature a stationary front and waves of low pressure from Oklahoma to the Delmarva Peninsula, which is what I was thinking we would see. And we could still see as we move through February. But in El Nino years, you get strong short waves diving in from the polar jet stream, interacting with short waves cutting across the Gulf Coast, and then you can get a redevelopment off the North Carolina coast, and there's your Miller B type storms redeveloping and tracking towards the coastal waters. El Nino years typically feature more Miller B and times Miller A winter storms than La Nina seasons. Any hints of what the orientation of the El Nino would be? I don't have any hints right now. What I have to do is, and again, let me go back here. Okay, what I'm going to be studying for as we move through the fall and through the summer is I'm going to be studying these subsurface anomalies and see how they set up. And that'll give me a better idea of what our orientation is going to be like as we move forward. Typically, if I see a lot of warming out here around 100 west, that's usually a bad sign for snow lovers out there, because that usually means you end up with an east-based El Nino. If I see this signal spreading towards 180, 170, if I see this pushing northward higher in the sea surface temperatures, and I see more support of above normal waters around here, then that would support more of a west-based El Nino. But I can't make any indication of that right now because we're too far out from that circulation developing to make that determination. And checking out YouTube, looks like we're good there. Let's see if there's anything new. In terms of questions, nope, looks like we're good there. Okay. But overall, great questions, guys, tonight. And again, I can understand some disappointment, certainly, in this pattern and in this scenario. And it's not what I wanted to say tonight. What I would wanted to say, and I was looking at the data for all this afternoon and say, okay, what can I pull from this data that would be exciting or interesting? And the only thing I could look at and say, okay, we definitely know there's going to be stretching. We definitely know there's going to be Arctic air masses coming in. We definitely know there's going to be that potential. But when I kept on seeing in every solution this signal showing up with our blocking, it's just not a signal that would scream out winter storms. And here's a great example using the GFS here. Again, never take it as verbatim, but notice the storm tracks here. They are typically cutting up to the west or well to the east. And in that scenario, and again, we can even take a look at the European ensembles. Look at the general trends. Is that your low pressure systems are either too far south or too far west. Now, again, there is some sort of indication of something trying to brew around early February that we'll have to keep an eye on. But even in these scenarios, it's very much thread the needle, perfect scenario trying to set up. And let's see here. Yep, I know it's not what you guys wanted to hear. I can appreciate that. But like I said, I'd rather be honest with you guys than not. I know there's some individuals out there that might be really tooting the horn for February. And I'll admit, even up to last week, I was like, well, there's still a good chance. We'll have to see how the data looks like for February. But when I started to see more and more support, stronger and stronger support for a positive NAO pattern, when I take a look at this 500 millibar pattern in the forecast here, this is just not a signal you want to see. This is the exact opposite of what you want to see. You want to see this feature down here and this feature up here. It's the exact opposite. And so when I see something like this, I'm like, yes, there's a ridge on the west coast. You have a trough over the east coast. Clearly cold air is going to be available to work with. But this signal right here just tells me, well, you got a low pressure system developing in the Tennessee River Valley. It could easily cut up right towards central New York because there's nothing to block that low pressure system to remain over the coastal waters. And you have your tropospheric polar vortex sitting up here around the Hudson Bay, if not a little bit further north. This would mean that your cold air comes in and then gets pulled out. It doesn't lock the cold air in. So part of my objective for tonight is just to warn you guys, especially snowplow guys and whatnot. Hey, look, this is not looking favorable in any way, shape, or form. I would love to say differently, but this is the data. This is what I have to work with. This is what I'm seeing. And so I think that's the best thing to learn. Well, lesson learned, major volcano eruptions suck for New York City snow. Not always. And, a lot in this case, I really don't blame the volcano aspect for the lack of snowfall. The volcano aspect got us to the point where you could have the disruption of the polar vortex. You had a weak polar vortex to begin with, and you had an unusual pattern with La Nina that we typically don't see. I have to wonder, and this is something I'm starting to check out and see if it makes any sense. Let me see, where is it? Okay, I have to wonder whether earlier on the gradient that we had here in the Pacific, if that is what sped up the subtropical jet stream to the point that the short waves were just mistimed because of that. I'm not sure. Again, it's something I have to study, but that could be a signal. The return of the cold water right on the west coast, that could definitely be a signal, because this aspect right here is more of a negative PDO signal that's showing up here. So that could definitely be a factor, because as we started the winter, this was warmer, and so it was setting up just perfectly. I mean, we remember early December, we're seeing everything coming in, and we're saying, wow, this could really work out. This could really start to set up. We had a very powerful negative NAO pattern, excuse me. You had everything coming together, and then that first short wave, and that first storm ahead of Christmas, that just kind of blew everything right out of the water and just kind of caused a mistiming of the 500 millibar pattern. Do you anticipate the volcano to still have an influence next winter? It's a good question. Right now, the impact should be waning, but there still would be a couple of factors. But we'll be keeping an eye on that. I've been following you for almost 2 years, and you have been more accurate than any local news. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you very much. Do you think we can see one blocking for a snowstorm right up the coast? Dylan. Okay. Oh, Dylan. I swear. Okay. Look, my friend. You can phrase it in different ways, but it's still the same thing. Right now, I don't have any data to support any type of major winter storm, at least over the next 7 days. All right? I'll give you a little bit of hope. All right? Over the next 7 days, really I can go early next 10 days, I see no concrete data to support a major East Coast storm at all. Maybe, yes.
I will say statistically, there is always President's Day weekend.
Yes, that is true. And there is a major event around February 20th that we're getting ready for, which I will share in the coming weeks.
We'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get there. But our luck, because it's a major event, that most likely on that day there will be a blizzard just because of that. But right now, so snowless winter, maybe. You know, for the first time, I think there's actually, I can honestly say right now, there might be a really good chance that this could be the snowless winter of New York City, in Central Park. You could end up with no accumulating snowfall. The potential is certainly there now. We've gotten to this point now. Once we get into February and you have a raging positive NAO at this point with no accumulating snowfall, there's a chance that we could be seeing the first New York City year where we had 0 inches of snowfall, because they don't count a trace as a. But yeah, I mean, you have to actually literally consider it now. Because you're at that point now. Let's see here. Indian Ocean Basin is cooler than it has been in a long time. That is definitely true. North Pacific overall looks cooler than it has in a while. The above average anomalies are not as above average as they have been. That is true. It definitely has backed off a bit. The strongest it was when we had that raging jet moving across from China all the way into California. But again, that whole setup, and I said that at the time, was more El Nino-like than anything else. Very unusual to see that evolution take place. And I think part of that had to do with that gradient that's set up. Let's see what else we have here. 1972 was very close. Other parts of New York City Metro did have 0 that winter, if I recall correctly. Yes. I believe JFK reported 0. LaGuardia reported a half an inch. And Central Park reported just under, I think 3/4 of an inch or an inch itself. But that's about it. Yeah, I mean, look at the positives here. It can't possibly be any less snowy for next year if you're at 0 this year, right? A little bit positive? I don't know. But that's pretty much where we are tonight. I would love to have shared better news based on what I'm seeing here right now. But I think it was more important that I was candid tonight and say, hey, look, this is what I'm seeing. This is the data. And for all you snow lovers out there and guys who, more importantly, who run businesses based off of this, the data just is not shaping up the way that you'd want it to support some good news. And it's my responsibility to just say straight out, here's what I'm seeing, and it's not looking good. So hopefully, maybe next week we see some data and we have some better news. And maybe, we can get a thread the needle type situation between now and February 20th. And then after February 20th, it becomes more and more difficult because then by that time we should start to see the polar vortex contract again. Because when you have stretching going on, eventually you do get that contraction. And so that's setting up to be around late February, which would mean even if there was another disruption, it wouldn't be showing up in the 500 millibar pattern until mid-March. And by then you have sun angle issues, the polar air masses aren't as strong, so on and so forth. So I'm kind of putting February 20th as your make or break as far as snowfall potential on the East Coast. A little bit longer for the interior. But I think after that point, it becomes a lot harder to pull a rabbit out of your hat, so to speak. So that's where we are tonight. I'll continue to keep an eye on the pattern and, of course, update every day. And we'll see where we go from there. So I want to thank everyone for joining tonight. I really appreciate it. I hope I continue to see you guys as we move forward. I know that sometimes we start to slack off a bit, but hey, we'll be keeping an eye on severe weather through the spring and whatnot through the summer. And that's all I got for tonight. So again, thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. And as always, let me go back here. Stay safe out there.